Hi, I'm Katie Gilbert, and I am in the English department at Drury. I specialize in Victorian literature, and I especially work on law and literature and the Victorian novel. One of my areas of research has to do with the character of the lawyer in the Victorian novel. So I write a lot about lawyers and the ways in which they help or sometimes challenge families and individuals in Victorian novels. Victorian novels are famous for being hundreds of pages long. They're called triple-decker novels, and they often have huge casts of characters, sometimes even over 100 characters in one novel. And what I realized was I started to think about, why do we care about characters so much? And I asked that question because I was thinking about a specific type of character, the lawyer. So I find often that students experience characters as if they're people who come into their lives and change their lives in some way. And I started to think, why does that happen and how does that happen? And I realized that there's a connection between the ways in which we watch characters in novels move through their worlds and end up getting into a series of conundrums where they have to make decisions. They're often in situations where they have to make ethical choices, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And this is something that causes us to be really interested in them. So when I teach certain novels, I find that students are also at a stage in their lives when they're getting ready to strike out on their own in the world. And they too have to think about the question of their own agency in the world as an individual. They too see their own world fraught with fears and hopes for the future. So students in college are also starting to think about the question, what can I do in the world? A question that characters in Victorian novels so often faced. So these novels help us think about how those before me creatively imagined the process of growing up and staking out a claim in the world. So when we read, for example, Charles Dickens's Great Expectations or Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre, while the settings may feel rather foreign to students, it's always interesting to discuss with students how they might connect with the challenges Pip or Jane find themselves in, and what ethical choices are available to characters in their worlds.
We've got love, romance. Clearly there's something brewing between Jane and Rochester.
Oftentimes, I also like to get students to think about literary form or genres. Why does one particular period, such as the Romantic period, become a time in which so much poetry is produced? I get them to think about what historical circumstances were in play that allowed for a specific genre to flourish. Why does the novel become such a popular genre in the Victorian period? And what can drama do that novels can't do? And why might some stories be best told on the stage instead of in a long poem or a novella? So I really enjoy getting students to think about the relationship between literary forms and social and cultural contexts, and how these forms allow for different types of character development or different stories to be told.
Okay, great. So we're seeing a pattern here.
Literature gets us all to imagine the life of another person in another place or another time. The experience of reading and taking in someone else's story can help us to develop both empathy and sympathy for our fellow human beings. One of my favorite classes to teach is Literature Matters, an introductory course. I teach it as a Gothic monsters class. We read novels in the Gothic tradition and works that have monsters or what we might think of as traces of monsters in them. While students often begin the semester thinking about monsters as non-human and dangerous creatures, as we read on, we see that who gets labeled as non-human and dangerous in a specific time often relates to social anxieties in a time period. So we end up thinking about human rights, what it means to be human, who has been excluded or not considered fully human over the course of time. We start the class with works like Frankenstein and Dracula, but we end up with contemporary readings. In this class, I think we can really start to see the ways in which literature engages with the central questions in the humanities. What does it mean to be human? And how do these definitions change over time? Happily for me and the students, we also get to read great literature, which is full of Gothic imagery and suspense, while delving into these larger meaning of life questions. That makes it both a serious endeavor and very fun at the same time.